Hi, folks. Turn this way down. Welcome to another edition of the Omnis Tower. Today's topic is going to be another fairly controversial one. I think I'm going to entitle it Catholic Church, the world's oldest cultural Marxist institution. So, let's get right down to it. So, everyone knows what the Catholic Church is. This is the version of Christianity, basically wrapped around the papacy in Rome. So the Pope and the cardinals and the organization of priests that basically constitute what was official Christianity in the west part of Europe for well over 1,000 years until the Reformation. Okay. So, Rob, why do I label this a cultural Marxist institution? Well, let's take a look at what cultural Marxism is. What we're seeing all around us in the media and big tech censorship, etc. Basically, cultural Marxism is a scheme of political control through culture, through becoming so dominant in culture that any counterculture can immediately be silenced. Now, that depends. It depends on what you define as counter to the culture, what is being silenced. And this is what is particularly useful about today's version of cultural Marxism, because it allows basically anyone to be targeted over the space of the 2 or 3 seasons of new media content that it takes to get people's minds twisted into a new religion. And if you've heard me talking about religion before, you'll know that I define religion much more broadly than most people. Religion, to my way of thinking, is a belief system that explains all the things that you can't fill in or don't want to fill in through doing your own research and scientific exploration. So this is why we have so many religions. There are many different beliefs. Believe whatever you want to, and many beliefs have served communities, countries, cultures well in the past. And so, lest you take this as a blanket attack on the Catholic Church, I would like to point out that cultural Marxism is not ipso facto a bad thing. Where it becomes bad is when it becomes so pervasive that it actually becomes a bullying force in society, either accidentally or on purpose. And what we're seeing nowadays in cultural Marxism is, to some extent, an accidental bullying that happens when you get a bunch of people tuned into mainstream media, both entertainment, indoctrinainment, I like to call it, and what we're discovering is largely fake news, manufactured news that serves an agenda. And the people brought up in those echo chambers are very much like religious cultists, very much like hardcore Catholic believers. Okay, so let's drop back and say and look at what the core of Catholicism is. If you go back to the very roots of the Catholic Church, the core principle was that the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, was the senior representative of God on earth, the God of the Bible, the God of Jesus, which version of the Bible that Christians believe. And beyond that tenet was that that was the only belief system that was, quote, right. The Orthodox Church was somewhat tolerated because the only difference they had, at least until I think it was like the Third Crusade, when the Western Crusaders actually conquered Constantinople, the Eastern Empire, for a brief time. The only conflict they really had was whether the Patriarch in Constantinople or the Pope in Rome had precedence. And most everyday people didn't really care much about that and worshiped the same God, even if they used a different representation of the cross. Eastern Orthodox Church uses different representation of the cross. You will notice they have a cross with a little extra bar on it to distinguish their followers from the Catholic Church. Okay, so in what way is the Catholic Church cultural Marxist? Well, let's look at their history. Okay, we don't know for sure there ever was St. Peter or whether he was the Bishop of Rome. This is the first thing that you'll need to come to grips with. There's no hard physical evidence for that. There's early evidence for Christianity of some sort being practiced in Rome, from the tomb carvings, the catacombs, and so forth, from the writings of the time, talking about this Eastern sect that supposedly ate their God. But in fact, that was a common practice for many Eastern sects, just Christians. And it was a common misunderstanding of some of the sacraments that had overtaken the Eastern religions, since blood sacrifices had gone out of favor, or at least human sacrifices had gone out of favor, which was a phase that most human religions have gone through. Okay, so the first we really know of the Catholic Church becoming more of an organized effort is the reign of Constantine, when it became the official religion of the emperor and thus approved for general use across the empire. And a number of councils were held during Constantine's reign. The Nicene Council, that developed the basis for the Catholic Church's version of Christianity. And almost immediately after began persecutions of people who believed in other ways. And you can read up on the Arian heresy, the Cathars, et cetera, et cetera. There were many, many groups of Christians persecuted because they didn't follow the Catholic Church the way they wanted to follow. And particularly, the main beef was over giving the church its due, tithing, contributing to the church, that as basically a government that leads to Rome. This is how Rome stayed relevant on the world stage after the fall of the Western Empire. If it had not been for the Catholic Church, Rome could well have become just a bunch of old ruins like the Etruscan cities near it, which at one time were rivals of Rome. So yes, the Catholic Church is a political institution, and its leaders had political motivations in everything they did. Now, not all political motivations are necessarily bad. To a good pope's way of thinking, the Catholic Church provided insulation for the people against overweening nobility. The worst oppression of the people of a monarch could be reined in through threat of excommunication. And so there was an element of good in what they did. But there is no question that by promoting the primacy of Rome, they were put in a position of needing to oppress other thoughts, rein in free speech. And it became so pervasive that you had many, many generations of people in Western Europe who grew up with the idea that, this is all there is. You believe this or you are an infidel. And this is why Jews came to be persecuted in Europe. This is why we had the Crusades. And I'm not going to say the Crusades were all the Christians' fault. The Muslims were just as at fault for their particular version of cultural Marxism, trying to force their way of thinking on others and shut down free speech and normalize a culture to one politically correct narrative. And ultimately, in doing that, you're creating a religion. You're creating a vision of spiritual good that you believe has to trump all others. Okay? And this is why I speak out so often against cultural Marxism, because it is currently elitist, even if it is coming from the grassroots. So Marxism, in its infancy, was thought of as a populist movement. The proletariat represented the poor people, and the bourgeoisie represented the rich people. And this oppressor-oppressed grouping of people became the motivation for this new religion of communism. It's really fundamentally no different than the Catholic Church's conception of you're either Catholic or you're an enemy of the church and need to be persecuted. And this is core to every bit of messaging you're going to get from me as an omnist, that any of these is exclusively elitist conceptions of religion and political correctness is dangerous, is ultimately going to result in evil, because it's going to concentrate power into the hands of those that control the culture, cultural mouthpieces. Now, in times of the Catholic Church, the cultural mouthpieces were rather diverse. I mean, the Pope had a great deal of say. The papal bulls carried a lot of weight, but not infinite weight, and many, many monarchs succeeded just fine ignoring the Pope. In fact, the Reformation was actually started in earnest by a monarch, not by Martin Luther, by King Henry VIII wanting to get divorced from his Catholic wife, starting a whole new branch of the Church, the Church of England, just so he could get a divorce. And this is why the Anglican Church looks so strange to Catholics, because their rites are almost identical. Their beliefs are almost identical. And the whole reason for having two different ones is because the Church of England liked the independence it gave them from Rome. And the English liked it too. And so that church stayed. Now, they stopped persecuting Catholics eventually and allowed the Catholics to coexist. And that sort of tolerance is at the root of what omnism is all about. Okay? The omnist faith is a faith that if we are tolerant and respectful of others and don't try to force our beliefs onto them, force our culture onto them, our dogma, talk it out and rationally see, well, which one makes the most sense? Because, You can't go down the path of, well, there is no truth. This is insane. This is the insanity that's driving a lot of New Age religious thought right now. Oh, well, this is all an illusion. We all create our own truth. This is the essence of this law of attraction bunch of ninnies. That everyone can have their own truth, everyone can have their own little bubble of reality, and that's okay. Well, it's not okay. Obviously not okay, because when your truth impinges on somebody else's truth, and what you want to make reality, what you want to consider reality doesn't match someone else's, you've got a conflict. And conflicts need to be resolved or they will keep growing. And if you listen to my last podcast on oneness, this is why I equate oneness with numbness, because it's numb stupidity that would make you think that this could ever work, that we are all one, that we could all believe the same thing, have the same government, have the same culture, have the same rules, and everything would just be hunky-dory. It's stupid. And the Catholic Church proved that. It established what was a relatively healthy cultural Marxist regime. Its hand was fairly light. It was not too authoritarian. It was relatively fair in the way that the Pope was elected, the way the cardinals were appointed, the way the priests were assigned. But it still had problems, and people saw that, and they didn't like it. There was still nepotism. There was favoritism. There was unfair persecution. All of the things that come with a cultural Marxist regime. And this is what makes it such a great example to show what is so dangerous about this woke cult, which has been trying to take over media and technology. These are a bunch of young people who have been raised on the idea that they hate religion. And because they hate religion, they either declare themselves to be spiritual but not religious, or they declare themselves to be atheists. And those are two groups of people, two religions that are extremely dangerous. Why, do you ask me, are those more dangerous than the Catholic Church? Morality. You see, when a pope misbehaved, there was a sense that they did something wrong. They sinned, they transgressed against the Bible. The Bible had a fairly clear set of commandments of things that were kind of bad. And yes, there was a lot of wiggle room there, and things like thou shalt not kill. Well, what if somebody's trying to kill me? Can I defend myself? There's a lot of loose language, loose change in the Bible, and people can make use of that to justify all sorts of things, and they have. And this is what has made the religions of the Bible fraught with a lot of problems. And exactly why we need a new religion. Now, folks are saying, no, we don't like religion, we hate it, it's horrible. Now, if you don't have a religion, if you don't have some shared understanding of religion, then you are going to embrace an anti-religion, which is still a religion. It's just a religion based on negation. Okay? An anti-anything is a very negative thing. That's why anti means negative. If you're against everything that something else stands for, you're basing your entire worldview, your religion, on a position of hate, of dismissal, of denial. And this is absolutely not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about being able to embrace what we can share, to agree to disagree on what we can't share, and to agree to be tolerant and respectful of each other about those things. Now, if somebody says, well, I can't vote for exploring Mars because it's against my religion, outvote them. Okay, it's against your religion, it's not against mine. Let's let the population decide. This is what real democracy is about. What the Republic of the United States was set up to be. And it was set up to be a government defending the God-given rights of all souls. Now, where this sometimes falls short is how do you define a soul? Well, are only American citizens having souls? Are only men having souls? Or are only white men having souls? Are only transvestites having souls? What about the souls that live in other countries? What about the souls of plants? What about the soul of this planet, which we all inhabit and which we depend on for sustenance? And this is where another area where old just fall short. By becoming too humanistic, too focused on our species or my group, my party, my religion, we have painted ourselves into a very selfish corner where we can rationalize a lot of evil. And this is what cultural Marxism does. You are able to get enough power to control the culture, control the messaging of culture. You actually have the power to control everything. You can control the leaders, even if you're not the leader, because they're going to be logging into Facebook every day, logging into Twitter, and seeing what the people are thinking of what's going on right now. Thinking that they're seeing what the people are thinking of, but as we're finding out with the whole Elon Musk thing, this is mostly bots posting in support of a political agenda that's being supported by the engineers that run Twitter, who are actively deposting or deprioritizing or deplatforming viewpoints that are opposed to what they want. This is cultural Marxism. I don't care if you say you're not a Marxist, if you say you're not a communist, you are engaging in cultural Marxism, and it is evil. It is an evil religion. If you approach politics from that standpoint of doing anything to win for your team, your party, you are in fact a cultural Marxist. You are a member of an organization that is fully prepared to do evil in the name of its good. And this is the whole reason why Eastern religions wanted to be non-dualistic. Now, granted, this was stupid, and I already talked about that in the oneness segment, so I'm not going to go back there again. But we need to get back to an understanding that there is a plurality of souls here. Not every human wants the same things. Not every human needs the same things. We all have different goals, different abilities, different dreams. And what needs to be guaranteed is the freedom to pursue those dreams, to have those thoughts, to let them take us where they take us, so long as we don't step on others. This is where omnism comes in with karmic sin as opposed to biblical sin. Karmic sin is much, much more well defined than the Ten Commandments. Karmic sin is knowingly taking advantage of another soul, taking from them the ability to figure things out for themselves, the ability to act on their own initiative, to pursue their own goals, program their thoughts, in fact, is the biggest cardinal sin. So cultural Marxism is a huge sin, and that's why I will speak out against it again and again. If you want to impose your thoughts on others, you are, in fact, a servant of the real Antichrist. And I'm going to do a separate segment on Antichrist, so I'm not going to get into who the Antichrist really is. I've talked about it a little bit before, but I think we're going to do a very focused segment on it next. At any rate, the Catholic Church has a lot of skeletons in their closet, and they need to come clean and admit it and move forward. Because you know what has happened? If you are as old as I am, you will have remember there was a time where the Catholic Church in the U.S. was actually in the lead of the woke movement. Catholic nuns were some of the wokest people in the United States, and some priests. And they were absolutely in the forefront of LGBT rights. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that they were actually, the Catholic Church was a large factor in what made those movements happen and what made them so permissive, so tolerant of aberrant behavior in those groups. I have no problem with two consenting males or two consenting females or a group of consenting adults engaging in whatever kind of sexual practice they want to get up to in private, at their own risk of disease, at their own risk of relationship trauma. Fine, knock yourselves out. I would never support making a law that would make such practice illegal, nor would any person who respects freedom, who respects the United States Constitution. What we will take very much a stand against is public displays that might influence our children in ways that we don't want them to be influenced, because that gives you cultural Marxist power over our children. And there is nothing more sovereign to a human being than the children we produce. Now, granted, there are parents messing up their children's minds too. And to some extent, we have to have laws to prevent that from doing harm. And there's a case in the news right this week about a woman promoting their child as a drag stripper and then taking exception to people posting photos of it and saying, well, you have no right to do that. They're not public. You're spoiling his brand. This person is evil. This is the kind of person who needs to have their child taken away from them by protective services. No different than the Hollywood moms of old. The families of child stars like Shirley Temple, who took advantage of them and made tons of money off of pandering to pedophile dreams, essentially. There's no reason to. And if you go back and you look at some of the depictions, even in the movies of Shirley Temple, you will see that she was dressed up in costumes that were exposing way too much of a child's leg. Looked way too much like a burlesque dancer's costume. And people took exception to that then, and they were said, oh, you're just a prude. And they were poo-pooed and put down as being too religious. And this was the start. I've seen this cultural Marxism thing in the United States from its almost beginning, because I grew up watching a lot of old movies and stuff. My first experience with television was this old black and white TV set that my dad won in a raffle. And we'd never had a TV set before then. But since they had this raffle in work, he won a TV set. Okay, well, I guess we'll try it out. Maybe it's going to be better than the radio. And this whole thing, we had 3 channels, 4 eventually. And we used it for so long that you eventually had to tune your channel, like, sit down about 15 minutes before and try to get this thing tuned in and the antenna just right so you could watch your favorite half-hour program. I used to do that for the Beverly Hillbillies, which was my favorite show as a child. And I've seen this thing develop from the very infancy of television set. And I am able to speak to this in a way, and I've also had the experience of visiting other countries in different stages of this takeover of television and media, and now smartphones and social media. And I have seen all its insidious sides. And I'm not a Luddite that says, well, we just need to take it all away, regulate it out of existence. No, we've got to learn to deal with these things, deal with them healthily. And that absolutely is the key thing why we need to rein in cultural Marxism. The moment you start letting some special interest group, some politically motivated special interest group, define what normal is, what right is, and force it on everyone else, they are doing wrong. This is where evil starts. And the phrase that I'll repeat again and again is so true: power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what we are seeing with cultural Marxist wokeism in the U.S., and now it's spreading to the rest of the world through social media, and the long arm of Netflix and other streaming services, is cultural Marxism on steroids. And the people producing this content may not know what they're doing. They say, well, I just make what's popular. Well, that's an irresponsible point of view. If you are not taking spiritual ownership of the consequences of what you are putting in front of people's faces, the lies you are spreading, the half-truths you are spreading, the false narratives you are spreading. I mean, there are statistics to back this. So here's a fun one for you. They have done studies to see what percentage of people are naturally inclined to homosexuality. They've done that research very, very thoroughly and scientifically. And the truth is that it's only about 2% of the population. Now look at what they're spreading on this on media now, like it's completely mainstream and normal. And there are places where they're even encouraging kids to come out as young as 3, because we've got to make sure that they're able to have their real sex. This is insane. This is absolutely insane and completely politically driven. And it's got to stop. It is evil. It is a manifestation of Antichrist. And in this, I have full agreement from every religion on the planet, including Catholicism, who's finally wised up and seen how they were actively participating in the corruption of our youth by supporting priests and nuns who wanted to have some backup for their personal homosexual proclivities. If you remember, there was a big flap not so long ago about priests molesting young boys. It's been a thing in the Catholic Church for as long as the Catholic Church has required priests to be celibate, which is a very unnatural thing to ask of your clergy. And one of the areas of Christianity, the Catholic Church, I think is absolutely insane. So did most of the people in the Reformation. Protestants let their clergy marry, and they think that sex is a perfectly healthy part of human existence, as long as it's done responsibly. This is a more omnist view. So, I mean, if you look at the march of religion, it's heading in the right direction. What's the problem has hit is that in the advent of communism, you've got a large group of people wanting to push faster. And they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They're throwing the good of religion out with the bad. And we're seeing in spades what that gets you. We are raising an amoral society. And when an amoral society becomes ruled by amoral rulers, you get Communist China, you get Nazi Germany, you get Stalinist Russia. And there are examples after examples of what happens when a communist or materialist globalist authoritarianism takes over a country. They become completely utilitarian. This is a good term for you to look up, utilitarian. This is a term that comes out of the worship of science era, the I hate religion era, science can explain everything era. Okay, well, if everything is all just random interactions of atoms, and we care about the atoms that make up humanity, then we will do what is best for the common good. And whatever we have to do, the utility of what is best overcomes any pain or suffering we cause. And this is how globalists think. This is how the Davos set thinks. They are very utilitarian in their thinking. Well, we've got too many people. So what we need to do is, let's call it, let's see, let's call it, what's the word they're going to give to it? Something depopulation. Benevolent depopulation? Thoughtful depopulation? Gradual depopulation? Let's spread some new germs that are going to target people that really don't need to have kids because they're obviously not capable of providing anything useful to us anymore now that we have our robot slaves. There are people that think like this, and it's very evil. Now, that doesn't mean we don't concern about these problems, that we don't need to have some consciousness of overpopulation and its effects on the environment. I live in a pretty overpopulated country, at least in parts of it, here in Indonesia. And Jakarta is definitely a complete disaster. There's way too many people in that city for its supply chain to support adequately. And it's going to be one of the cities that is going to suffer greatly with what's coming. The collapse of supply chains, collapse of the resource distribution system of this planet. But it doesn't need to be that way. A lot of what is going on is a misuse of resources, misdirection of resources. And it is exactly because of these cultural Marxist utilitarians that is happening. Oh, yes, they're beating their chests saying, oh, we have to do something about climate change. We need to kill fossil fuels, blah, 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 blah. This is insane. This is stupid and insane. And it's all putting the problem back on the average person who needs that to get to work, who needs those fossil fuels to get products to them. Where they created the problem in the first place by creating these insane global supply chains instead of manufacturing locally, producing locally, creating sustainable economies based upon short supply chains, not robbing Peter to pay Paul, forcing one country to produce cash crops and stop producing the food that their own people need so they can ship the cash crops, make a bunch of money in the U.S., and then have the U.S. ship grain, soybeans, and so forth to them. This is a globalist dream. It is a humanity nightmare. And this is what you get when you replace something like a Catholic Church with a church of UN, meritocratic Scientologists. So, I don't know. I came down pretty hard on the Catholic Church in this, but I'm really coming down on our whole species. We have all succumbed to the lure of the Antichrist. And we'll talk about that Antichrist, who it really is, what we all really do about it, instead of just argue about who caused the problem and who we're going to lynch if we ever get the power to do the lynching. At any rate, I think I'm done for today. Thanks for tuning in to the Omnist Hour. Like, share, subscribe, and come back again. I hope the audio was better today. I've been having some problems with my microphone. I think I got it licked today, but we'll see when I finish recording. Take care, and we'll see you next time.